but it doesn't start, at the performance level. Perhaps our conversation may, sound as if, we are focusing on performance, but I want from the grassroots, from the early, stages of sport participation, coaches to understand that the way they lead, the way that they relate and communicate is absolutely paramount for these young people to maintain their involvement in their sport and engagement in their sport for the long term.
Well, welcome, Sophia. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. How are you?
Thank you very much, Steve. It's wonderful to be here with you today. I am very well, thank you.
Fantastic. I'm really looking forward to getting into your topic of expertise around coach and athlete relationships, and so important. And I remember when you were involving me in some of those discussions and interviews, and I've been keeping track over the years. It's so great to see the insights. And what I really love about your work is the models that you've created. There's some impressive model making going on, Sophia. Some great acronyms, alliterations, which actually I really admire in the sense of, it makes it difficult when research comes out and it becomes quite forgettable. So congrats on the acronym creations as well as the research. But could you just give me a bit of an introduction as to why you got into this area? Why did you start exploring this area of coach and athlete relationships?
Okay, why did I start? I was an athlete myself many years ago. I represented Greece, in fact, as a junior in athletics, and in that time I had three wonderful coaches, but one was more wonderful than the other two, and I started noticing that the importance of interactions, of how people communicate, and whilst, as an athlete, you don't particularly pay attention. When I decided to close that chapter of my sporting career and start a new chapter of an academic career, I thought it would be good to have a look at those interactions between coaches and athletes. And as I was looking at the literature, Steve, what struck me particularly was that we looked at the interpersonal dynamics between coaches and athletes from a leadership lens. And for me, whilst that was an important way to look at how coaches, what coaches do in order to influence athletes' performance and well-being, I felt that it was one way. It was just unidimensional. What coaches do, and we forget what athletes do and how athletes influence the athletes, and this bidirectionality and reciprocity that exists in coaches and athletes. Actions, interactions, feelings, and thoughts. So I did a master's degree at Loughborough University, and then a PhD at the University of Exeter, where I started delving into the interpersonal dynamics between coaches and athletes from a relationship angle, because I thought there was a gap there. That was really my main interest. First, my personal experiences, identifying that there is something in the ways coaches and athletes work, and in the gap in the literature when I came to understand what is out there.
So that was a bit of a lived experience of saying, oh, I'm uplifted by this coach, and maybe I'm a bit knocked down from another. That was at least in the back of your mind as a reference point that you've been through. That's interesting. And then if I'm just interpreting that observation of leadership qualities of coaches, to a certain extent, is that the fact that coaches were sort of researched in terms of what they transmit, the sort of a one-way lighthouse? This is the way to be a coach. This is how to coach. This is how to give to the world, as opposed to recognizing how is that light received? What's the effect of that, and what's the interplay between two different people?
Yeah, yes, I think so. I think so. I mean, you have to go back 30 years, and predominantly at that time, and as sports psychology started to kind of exist and flourish and develop, um, leadership and the way coaching was happening was really around what coaches do. The coaches were the protagonists. Coaches were at the heart of coaching, and there was a buoyant literature around coaching outside sports psychology. So it was a little bit more easy perhaps or easier to transfer that work across to sports psychology. And as things were happening, I suppose coaches were very important, very significant, and it was the kind of a natural sort of way to focus on coaches. But over the years, um, and we have talked a lot about coach-centered coaching in the literature, have we not? And in fact, it is so popular in lay people's dialogues and interactions in our sport communities. Coach-centered approach have a place, but we seem to have moved now from this coach-centered coaching approach, from the coach-centered approach to coaching to the athlete-centered approach to coaching. And athlete has become, the center of everything and the focus of our attention, and rightly so. But I think the pendulum actually, Steve, has swung far too far. And whilst the athlete should be our protagonist and should be at the heart of coaching, I think at the center of it should be the coach athlete, what these two people together do. And more recently, I have introduced this idea of coach athlete centered approach to coaching to emphasize that the contributions that the coach and the athlete make is what should be at the center of our attention. These joint contributions. We want both coaches and athletes to work together, because it is not just what coaches do, but there is so much what athletes can do, and they've got so much information, our athletes, that can help coaches to do things better. And if we don't tap into that resource, I think we are really missing out.
Mm. And why do you say that you thought the pendulum has swung a bit too far? What are the observations that are giving you that sense?
Yes, I think that the athlete-centered approach to coaching, and the way that I understanding from an academic point of view, reading at the literature, but also how perhaps coaches interpret it in their workplace, in their practices, is that we put a little bit too much emphasis, too much focus on the athletes. We expect and need and require too much from athletes. We expect them to know their needs, to know their wants, to know why they do what they do. And they may not be ready to have all this information. We may disadvantage them, but by expecting all that much from the athletes. And I think what is important, as I said, is to perhaps reposition that emphasis to either or, to both of them. And then I suppose is where we really truly position the relationship that these people develop to the center of the coaching process.
Mm. So interesting. So it's interesting to hear your take on how things have changed over time. And so since you've started researching these dynamics, can you look back now and see any attributes, any dynamics that were prevalent then that are much less prevalent or accepted today?
Yeah, I think what I see today, and particularly that becomes more obvious if you look at high-profile coaches. For example, I will just throw a few names. You help me here, but people like Pep Guardiola, Jurg Klopp, who are continuously on the media, even Jose Mourinho and other such coaches, they have talked very openly about the importance of relationships, the importance of working with their athletes, the importance of understanding, of knowing, really, kind of connecting with the athletes, not just working in distance from them, but really working very closely. So I think these coaches have really brought to the attention of everybody that this way of doing things is probably a better way than what we used to do. And let's also not forget that we have moved, today I call it modern coaching. The modern coaching today, the contemporary coaching, is very different from what was when I was an athlete, for example. I was never asked by my coach, what are your goals? What are your aspirations? Where do you want to go? How long? What is your purpose here? I was never asked anything, and that is not, I think, atypical of that time, but it would be very atypical today if we don't ask our athletes, what are your goals? What are your aspirations? Or even when they don't know themselves, to help them and understand why they're doing what they're doing. Does this help at all, Steve?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think certainly the breadth of athletes that I've encountered over the years, as I'm just listening to you there, I'm thinking about sometimes you want athletes to be really engaged with you. And so you want them to be leaning forward, interested, asking questions, getting into some of the detail. Those are sort of signals and clues that they are bought in and that they are discerning and that they are looking for ways to adopt new practices to improve. You don't want them to do it too much in the sense that you don't want them to obsess, get stressed by the pursuit of every single little thing. And
But
so,
also, sorry, Steve. Yeah.
well, yeah, just in the sense of the breadth of the other end of the spectrum. Sometimes athletes just want to turn up. Tell me what I need to do. I don't want this big long discussion about what are we going to do today, how did I feel it went. That's up for you to do. And so I see that sort of a range of different perspectives, and both can perform extraordinarily well to a certain degree. And I guess the modern coach, what you're saying isn't necessarily you have to have one or the other. You've got to be able to flex and bend to the needs of different perspectives.
Precisely, and that is the idea and the strength of really coaching with that sort of notion that the relationship that you develop is your medium to performance success, to skill development, and to personal satisfaction and fulfillment, because you do have, like you said, a range of athletes in front of you as a coach. And some athletes will lean in, they will be very engaged, very motivated, inherently, bursting out of, wanting to do their best. But others may wanting it, but in a different way, and maybe others not knowing that they want it to be, the next Olympic champion, but they want to try it. So we've got different personalities, different characters, different attitudes. We don't know who is going to be the best athlete of them all. They have different qualities. But I think the relationship will help to uncover, and provide, this diversity and inclusion that we need in sport. We don't want coaches to be biased toward those who lean in versus to those who are perhaps a little quiet, a little bit reserved, a little bit different. Each one of them needs unlocking, needs different kind of buttons, different chords to strike, and the relationship is the medium that helps the coach uncover the talent. And there are so many coaches out there, high profile coaches. I can mention Marcus Weiss, an amazing coach, coached the German women's team in 2004 in Athens. they got gold medal. Then Marcus Weiss moved to the men's game. They won a medal in Beijing, gold with the men's, and then he won again gold here in London in 2012. So a coach who has really is one of those serial winning coaches, has spoken so clearly and so what is the word, acknowledging and recognizing the power of relationships.
And this is ultimately the center of, I guess, the tenet that you're putting forward. And I read in frequently in your work, the coach-athlete relationship is the most important relationship developed in sport. That that sense of that's where it's at. Of all the relationships that go on, that's the most important, influential, significant for the athlete and the coach.
Yeah. I think, Steve, that we often think the coach and the athlete as two groups. I really feel that the coach and the athlete for one team, one group, whether it is an individual sport or a team sport. And often, and you may correct me here, and this is something that I'm just contemplating at the moment, we often see the coach outside of the team or squad of players or athletes. I want to see the coach and the coaches, if there is a team of coaches, as part of the team, as one, with very strong connections with the athletes. And of course, this will have a spillover effect between athletes to develop, a good level of cooperation and commitment amongst themselves. So for me, the coach and the athlete are at the center, and what defines coaching and the effectiveness and success of coaching. And I would also like, national governing bodies, sport organization, to see those two people together, not as separate groups.
That's interesting, and I'm picking up the tweet that you responded to around Steve Kerr and a monologue at a press conference, I believe it was, about, look, it's their team. They have to take responsibility and sort of and impressing upon the team about the accountability that they show. Is that right?
That's right. Yes. Yeah. For me, accountability and responsibility lies in both the coach and the athlete, and I want this to be understood. I mean, if we think of businesses, for example, a manager is part of
Yeah.
the team, is working together. And that's why I would also like to see a little bit more conceptually the coaches to start thinking themselves as part of the team, responsible and accountable as much as the athletes. And of course, from professional football, we will know that there is accountability and responsibility from all parts involved. And I was about to say that, if the team doesn't, perform well, the coach might be fired, or the athletes will be, you know, uh,
It's an interesting one.
disciplined.
I certainly contemplated that thought myself and had that same parallel
Mm,
to the leader worker relationship in business. And I think that there is probably a need for some degree of separation. There is going to be a need for a little bit of distance because the leader is holding tensions that the worker wouldn't necessarily be feeling every day and have to make decisions that wouldn't please all the workers all the time. And I think so that that requirement for a coach who has to make selection decisions, this, if they're too integrated, it's going to be harder for them to make cleaner performance-based decisions or what's best for the team. So that was where my head went to as you were
mm,
talking, and when I looked at the Steve Kerr clip too. Um, but I think though fundamentally that we, and as a scientist, I see this all the time where, oh, we've got to try and get buy-in from the coaches or the athletes. We need to try and learn ways to persuade them to do Jedi mind tricks on them. And actually what I'm hearing is, why don't you sit down and work it out together, as the leader and the worker might do, as the coach and the athlete might do. If
mm.
you've got a problem in front of you and you've got competing views, you probably need to find better ways to work through problem-based learning, as opposed to trying to out argue each other. That was my kind of
Yeah.
rationale for that.
Yes, yeah, I certainly agree. The coach and the athlete have got different roles to play, but that doesn't prevent them from being part of a team where they can work together, resolve issues, and understand, the goals and the program, and have a common ground, as I say. But the only way that they will, the coach and the athlete will develop a common ground, a common purpose, is by speaking to one another, opening to one another, understanding one another, and the relationship, that quality relationship, will be the medium that will allow them to reach that, I think. But also the other point I would like to stress here, which might be important to highlight, is that I want coaches to appreciate that the relationship, whilst will provide an important medium to their success, and to to find well-being within themselves in terms of personal satisfaction, and personal thriving, is that I would hate to see, and I do see occasionally, coaches who develop strong links, harmonious, healthy, strong, good quality relationships with some athletes, whilst they haven't got a clue about some other athletes within the same squad or the same team. And there is some sort of caution here to put in that. I will hope that coaches are objective and they care about their relationships with each one athlete in the team and squad that they have, and they work together. Otherwise, it will create biases and will create difficulties when it comes to taking decisions, important
Mm.
decisions.
Yeah, okay, so that's an important health check in terms of just
Yeah.
thinking, oh, you've got some healthy relationships, but that doesn't mean necessarily you're good at coach athlete relationships. If you can do it time and time again with a variety of backgrounds, with a variety and diversity of uh, of personalities and perspectives, and so that probably leads to that idea of versatility and how you can connect with a variety of different people. So from your work, what what have you found to be the components of a successful coach athlete relationship? Um, I'll leave it with that question. I've got a follow-up question about the athletes too.
Okay. Right. So that was one of the first questions I asked myself when I started this line of work. What does a good quality relationship look like? What is a good relationship? What do we mean? What do we refer to when we talk about a good quality relationship? So we've done a lot of research, Steve, as you know, 20 years plus worth of research to try to answer this question. So I can tell you with some degree of confidence that I think we have kind of found an answer, until, of course, another answer comes around. But for now,
I like that though. But is it well, without getting to the answer, but the 3+1, it sort of acknowledges we're evolving, we're changing. Yeah, okay. So I'll leave you to answer before I start keep
that's correct.
interrupting.
Yes, indeed. So it is an evolving field. So what we know now, having consulted and interviewed hundreds of coaches and athletes and tested thousands of coaches and athletes over this time, we know that the coach-athlete relationship, as you will imagine, is complex, and it's very difficult to capture. But our research suggests that we've got 4 components that can define a good quality relationship. The first one is closeness. The second is commitment, complementarity, and co-orientation. So 4 C's. Closeness, very briefly, I will refer to each one of these dimensions
Mm.
or components, refers to coaches and athletes interpersonal feelings, the extent to which they feel affectively connected, and key qualities or relational properties that are included in this dimension of closeness are trust, respect, appreciation, and interpersonal liking. So these are the four relational properties around closeness. And if
Mm.
coaches and athletes have high levels of trust for one another, high levels of respect, high levels of appreciation for their efforts, and liking each other.
Yeah, that's an
Uh,
interesting one, and seeing that on the model made me it made me stop and think a moment. Can I just riff on that a little bit before we go
sure.
on to the next ones? Because it was sort of a little bit. It felt like that closeness element was similar to the trust equation. I think it was Charles Green. Trust, reliability, credibility, and intimacy. That part felt like it was similar. Intimacy,
Mm,
which is often misinterpreted, but ultimately is about how you connect with others. And I noticed liking. It was interesting because often you hear we don't have to like each other to get
yes,
along. You hear this all the time.
of course you
But
do.
probably in teams, actually, perhaps first and foremost, maybe in you're paying me to do work relationships like in business. But that was interesting that surface. Actually, I need to get on with you. A bit like an executive coach, you might have a familiarity session. I've got to get on with you
Mm.
before I can commit to working with you.
Sure. Yeah. I think, all coaches, not not so much athletes actually, but coaches do stop me or do stop themselves and think a little bit
Mm,
about this particular relational property. But I think liking is important and it is worth paying attention because I don't think any one of us will disagree that when we like people, we can work a little bit better with them than when we dislike them. Um, and I think perhaps for some, maybe not necessary, but what I say, just think how life will have been if you did like your athlete. Indeed, you did deeply like, the person that they are, or the ways that they interact, or indeed the foods that they eat, or the music that they listen. And it's very easy to develop liking. You just need to get to know the other person, and as soon as
mm,
you find some commonalities, you have strike that kind of bond that a like promotes. But I think the other thing that is dangerous if you also don't like somebody as opposed to liking is that it creates biases, negative biases. And if you like particularly, which is human nature, one athlete, but you dislike another, you're more likely to give certain training to that athlete that perhaps it's better because you pay attention, because you like that person for whatever reasons. And though that athlete that you dislike, you give that to that athlete a little less time, a little less attention. You notice him or her a little less, and so on and so forth. You see what I'm saying?
mm.
So liking can introduce negative bias that I would like to try to avoid. And that's why I say to coaches, well, just think about it. And is it a way that the person that you thought that you dislike, um, you can find some commonalities to help you develop some bond and address a little bit
Mm.
that relational property that perhaps you think is less important, but I think it is important if you dive deep down.
And maybe I can ask you a little bit about how you uncovered these in a moment, but I can certainly think of a few cases, highly successful coaches,
Mm,
highly successful athletes, and coaches who I've worked alongside. I didn't like them. I don't think the athletes liked them. They trusted them.
mhm,
They appreciated them. They respected them. There wasn't an openness, but there was honesty. that so there was a degree of closeness. It was almost like they're fulfilling some of these
Yes.
aspects, probably enough, as in you're getting me results. It's a relationship of sorts, and a lot of the other components, the other C's of the model, were fulfilled.
Mm.
But yeah, we don't need to get on.
Yeah. Yeah. You sound very transactional, and that works.
Yeah,
We know that. That is absolutely fine. And if there is trust and if there is respect and appreciation, but you lack on lacking or on liking, I'm sorry, then the average for closeness will be still high. I only kind of and this has come through the research and through the interviews, through speaking with coaches and athletes. I only kind of you find that into the closeness dimension only because coaches and athletes have said that liking actually makes life a little bit easier.
yeah.
And the same, coach athletes particularly, and Steve, I will take you back in your school years when you said to your mother or your father that, you know what, I don't like my teacher, that's why I'm not doing very well, and I hear it that from my own kids. When you don't like somebody or indeed hate somebody, it's very difficult to work, and you may have respect and appreciation, but there is something, that
Mm,
spice perhaps that is lacking.
yeah.
um,
Yeah, there's a bounce and an energy that you want to return in tomorrow. There's a pull. I will work for you. We get on, and so I'm going to give my best. So yeah, I can see that. All right, interesting. So go on, move us along through the model. We sort of
okay.
delved on closeness there, but tell us more.
All right, so we've got another three C's, and the next is commitment. Commitment reflects coaches and athletes' intentions, motivations, or willingness to maintain a close partnership over a period of time. And that is important because we all know that skill development, performance success doesn't happen overnight. You need to stay with each other for a period of time to check and challenge each other, and so on and so forth. Also, commitment seems to be the glue that connects the coach and the athlete in difficult times, in particularly. We know that, coaches and athletes have highs and lows, but commitment is the glue that connects them, particularly in times where they are challenging, they are difficult, such as performance dips or slumps, injury, burnout, personal circumstances that individuals have, do go through in their lives, and so on and so forth. So commitment is this intention to maintain the relationship over time. So I want to be coached by this coach this season, but also the next and the next, and correspondingly for the coach.
And so is that's a sense of we're in this together. I'm going to turn up. You're going to turn up. We're going to work at this. But also, I've got your back.
Yeah.
A sense of I value you, and I'm going to support you through this process, no matter what.
It is very much, yes. Primarily it's about reliability, it's about consistency, and it's about working extra hard for the other person. Dare I say sacrificing, but I know high performance
Mm.
doesn't like that. But it is about sacrificing time, sacrificing one's effort for the other person, going the extra mile.
Does this get overplayed? In the sense of first in the car park, last out. I'm at every single session, even if I don't necessarily need to be. A sense of I've got to show commitment at a 100% at personal cost, and I don't necessarily need to do that. There's a little bit of empowerment that perhaps sometimes could come in as I'm not going to be there tomorrow. I want you to do this, and this, and run it yourself, as
Sure.
opposed to a supervisory role for everything.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I totally agree. It's that is commitment. It's relying on others that they will do what you have set out to do, and that comes with understanding and knowledge. So it's consistency, it's reliability, it's the commitment, it's going the extra mile, whether it is with or without you, in the presence of each other, doesn't really
Mm.
matter.
Okay.
Doesn't really
Yeah.
matter.
Good.
Closeness, commitment, and now complementarity. Complementarity is synonymous to cooperation. So complementarity, I could have chosen cooperation. I chose complementarity for a number of reasons, but cooperation, so it kind of identifies and defines coaches and athletes acts of cooperative interactions. And here we've got two sets of behaviors that we expect the coach and the athlete to manifest and exhibit in training and competitions. The first is what we call the corresponding type of behaviors, where we expect both the coach and the athlete to express receptiveness, responsiveness, comfort and ease at each other's presence, demonstrate a friendly stance, and so on and so forth. Whereas the reciprocal type of behaviors reflect coaches and athletes' specific roles that they take as part of being in the relationship. So the coach has got a certain role to play. The athlete will have a different role. And the way we see it is that we expect that the coach being able to lead, to direct, to instruct, to provide feedback. These are the main kind of characteristics, behaviors, and the athlete to be able to filter in the information that they get from the coach, the ability to execute, and so on. And that is complementarity in a nutshell. So cooperation.
Okay, wonderful. So it's the equation of how your work is being received and integrated, and the balancing of that between two people.
That's right. Yes, it is the give and take, Steve, the way I see it. And, when we talk about responsiveness, for example, it is how does the coach respond to what I do, and how does the coach respond to what the athlete just did or is about to do. It's that it's a synchronization and coordination of responses.
This is a complete tangent, so stop me if I'm going into waters that you either have or haven't looked into. But the complementarity sort of suggests a two-way relationship. Now, that's going to be occurring in multiple directions with multiple athletes. So if you've got a squad, for example, but modern teams have multiple inputs and multiple voices or people responsible for different aspects, whether it's a performance director, a performance manager, a support team. You saw Wimbledon recently where Djokovic was tipping the hat to the whole of Alcaraz's team. The team behind the team is now a significant agent in what an athlete receives and experiences. How does this then start to change when the complementarity is extraordinarily complex with 3, 4, 5, 6 different people coming into play and complicating how things are received?
Such a great question. And I'm not quite sure whether I will satisfy you with my answer, but if I can use two responses. The first one will be, the research we have done thus far is having the coach and the athlete under the microscope. We really haven't really paid too much attention about the network of relationships around, this central point that we call coach athlete. But of course, there's a network of relationships around the coach and the athlete, the principal coach that works with the athlete very closely. And there will be the strength and conditioning coach, there will be the physio, there will be other people in the team that make Djokovic or Alcaraz who they are as a performer. But what I will expect is that the relationships that are developed, you can't use the 4 C's or the 3 C's plus 1 to profile and help you understand the quality of the relationship and where they are at. But most of our research, as you very well know, it is really looking at that microscopic or at the heart of that system that exists, particularly in high performance.
Well, I might come back to your one of your other models with C's in it, compass, because that conflict aspect I think is really interesting in teams.
Mm.
But anyway, I'll pause there and maybe move on to the final. Is this the plus one bit, the last one? Is this the plus one? It's sort of been added on later. Is there a background to that story at all?
Of course, there is. As always, there is a story. We started this research in the early 2000, and what we had three C's. But the three C's were the following: closeness, co-orientation, and complementarity. Um, but over the years and doing some sophisticated analysis, statistical analysis, and kind of progressing the work, commitment came into being. And there were a couple of things. First, co-orientation, the way we were trying to measure it did not quite work out. So we had to alter a little bit about how we conceptualized and how we operationalized and how we measured co-orientation. And then commitment took its place, pushed co-orientation out a little bit, and it is where we are.
So just come back to this, because this is in this. I think this is really interesting. But just tell us co-orientation. Just give us the sort of background and definition of that.
Okay, so co-orientation very simply reflects coaches and athletes shared mutual knowledge and understanding. I mentioned a little bit earlier about the common ground that these two individuals develop, which is absolutely paramount and significant. And it starts with knowing and understanding their own relationship, the relationship that they have with one another. Do they understand what type of relationship they have? Is it good or bad? Where are they relative to the three C's, for example? Are they discrepant in their views, or are they similar in their views? And of course, the co-orientation can really be transferred, transported, expanded to other aspects, such as their goals, for example. Are we on the same, wavelength with what we are trying to achieve? Is the program of training that we have understood by both of us, and so on and so forth. So co-orientation is much bigger, but for now, and for the purpose of this discussion, is about sharing an understanding of where our relationship is and how similar or different it is of interest here.
And what's the sort of facilitating behaviour there? Is that a sense of every now and again saying, how are we getting on? Is that what's the discussion there?
Of course, Steve, you will know, I'm pretty sure, that you can have a discussion today and know about things that are happening, and you may be very comfortable that you know the athlete and the athlete knows you because you have discussed. But if you leave it to hear it now and you never speak with that athlete again for several months, it may be that your common ground has shrunk because things happen, and you just haven't been present to those because the athlete or the coach hasn't shared this with you. So the co-orientation is something that or the common ground is something that athletes and coaches need to update continuously. Otherwise, it will not be helpful. It won't be useful.
Hmm. Okay, interesting. I can remember some really strong relationships with people, and I would say that probably sort of but two ways. I'm not just saying that I felt that, um, but they didn't have common ground of things that, oh, I like that too. We actually had a common ground of, I dislike that, and it was one of those things that we bonded over. Someone liked it a lot, someone disliked it a lot, but it was probably at least an expression and an exchange of our thoughts and our preferences, our background and our interpretation of the world. And that was what bonded us.
Sure, yes, it doesn't got to be that the similarity is that you understand that there is
Yes.
some dissimilarity in the ways that you view the world, but at least you know that this is how you view the world and how they view the world. So yeah, I think you're spot on there. I like that. Yeah.
Interesting. So I'm interested in so closeness, commitment, complementarity, and co-orientation, and commitments sort of moved from the outsider, and it's moved up top of the pops. It's moved up the sort of hit charts. Has is this a hierarchical or a prioritized list? Closeness being the most important, commitment. Why is it second and not the bolt on at the end? Or have you just thought actually it sounds better that way?
Yeah, it is. There's no priority or
Oh, okay.
hierarchy or significance at all. We perceive that all Cs are equally important, and it is just how we used to kind of call them. And in fact, it is interesting that when people change the order, I get a little bit fidgety. So, but this is just personal, and I don't mind it clearly, as long as all four are being highlighted. But yeah, sometimes when people change the order, I do feel a little bit strange.
Not nearly as twitchy, I bet. If you had closeness, commitment, reciprocity, and co-orientation, we like with a crazy R in the middle. I bet you'd go
Yes.
mad. So and how did you do this? So I'm just interested to know how you derived these. Is this a sense of talking to people and asking them what makes good?
Mm.
And I'm also interested as sort of a sub question part of that is, are you asking them what would be good? I.e., they're telling you some things, but really what they're saying is some of these things are missing. Or is it, no, these are deterministic. If they are not there, it deteriorates the relationship or they facilitate when they are there.
Okay, I'm not quite sure if I understand the question. So I'll start and just put me back in where I need to be.
Well, just tell me how did you get to these, and I'll
Okay.
build on that.
Brilliant. Yeah, that is helpful. Thank you. So, how we got to these four C's? How did we get to understanding the relationship, quality, like we are today? So, the first thing, just think. Back in 1997, I was a PhD student, and I was trying to understand what is a relationship. How other colleagues, academics have defined a two-person relationship. And I was reading, and I read about closeness, I read about commitment. All of these constructs exist in various different disciplines of psychology, but clearly a little bit differently from how I have ended up defining them. So I had a kind of a model in my head, having read that literature about two-person relationships. And then I went out to coaches and athletes and interviewed. And I asked them questions like, what is a relationship? As open as that. And they will call it communication, this, that, and the other. And then, to be perfectly honest, when I started, people did not have in their vocabulary the coach-athlete relationship. They did not.
Mm.
When I talk about relationship, they said, what do you mean? Their heads will go into romantic relationships, not the coach-athlete, the working type, the professional, in inverted commas, the sporting relationship that these two people develop. So I had to contextualize it a little bit so that they don't feel intimidated or they don't misunderstand my work anyways. And then the research I had read guided me a little bit in the questions that I asked. So as I said, we interviewed for 3, 4, 5, 10 years, perhaps. We kept interviewing people to try to understand what the relationship is, and always came back to how the model it is now. Oh, we can see all of these characteristics. People, coaches, for example, athletes will not tell you all of them, but they will tell you some of them. So that's how the model came to being. That's how the model kind of crystallized, and we have it now. And clearly, and I'm sure everyone will appreciate, we cannot capture everything. We have captured the main ingredients that define good quality relationships. By the way, we don't know what define a bad relationship. For example, Steve, if somebody has got low levels of respect or trust or like or commitment, it doesn't mean that the relationship is bad. It means it's not good. And these things can be improved. We know what a good positive relationship could look like in degrees, but we don't know what a negative relationship, a bad relationship look like in any of the degrees, because we haven't got the constructs, if you see what I'm saying. And that is important, I think, to appreciate and understand.
So it's not the inverse and the opposite, that low
I don't think
trust,
so. Yeah.
dislike, lack of appreciation, those sense, because or if I'm just playing with the topic, forgive me here, but there would be different ingredients, because it would feel toxic with an abuse of power, for example, where
Yes.
there isn't a positive version on your model here.
That's right. Yes, I don't. I mean, somebody who has got low trust, it may be because they haven't had the opportunity to get to know each other. They haven't had the time.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't want to determine that low closeness or low commitment or low complementarity determines a bad relationship. Perhaps an ineffective one, but one that can develop to an effective relationship.
Yeah. And how are these components measured? You mentioned statistical analysis, and I've seen multiple regression, a few in your research studies. Is there a quantification of the importance? Are there any more important than others as determining factors of a good relationship?
We have a measure. We've got a short and a long kind of instrument to measure the relationship quality, to measure the 4 C's. And our research highlights that the 3 C's can actually predict different things. So you will be surprised if I said to you that closeness seems to be a strong predictor of subjective performance. For example, if the athletes trust, respect, appreciate their coaches, they're likely to perceive that their training is going well, they perform really well, they feel competent, they feel motivated. Complementarity, on the other hand, what we have seen is that it does predict things like, for example, conflict. So the higher complementarity, or perhaps if I say the lower the complementarity, the more the chances for conflict. So we have seen some variations in what the 3 C's predict, but I would say all 3 C's are equally important in the bigger picture.
Mm. Can I sort of lean in on that one then, around that conflict? Because I see it as a big theme in your research and researching conflict in relationships. And I think it's the C of compass, so a further model. So I've written them down: conflict, openness, motivation, positivity, advice, support, and social support or networking, I think it was. Conflict then. So what causes conflict? What have you seen that are the initiators of conflicts to arise?
So you mentioned compass, and it is important to say here, the compass is a model that identifies key communication strategies that coaches and athletes can use to promote and enhance the quality of the relationship, to promote and enhance the 3 C's. So how we build better relationships, you can use the compass to kind of navigate you to develop a better quality relationship. So conflict management is one of them there, because it is important. If you manage conflict, if you're able to manage disagreements, misunderstandings, compatibility, is more likely that you will have a good quality relationship. Now, in terms of what are the sources of conflict, oh my gosh, there are multitude. There are so many that one can say. It shall I say three?
Well, I've got three in brackets on my notes on the computer that I've
Okay.
spotted in your research. So I'll see if they match. Go on.
Let's see. But of course, okay. So I will say I will say three. So deselection is one of them. The other one that I will say is burnout and injury can cause conflict, and lack of communication can be a third one. In addition to that, and to show how recursive relationship quality and communication is, relationship quality, the better the relationship, the quality, the more communication, and the more
Right.
communication, the better the relationship. But also you can see it in differently. Low communication, low levels of relationship quality, and vice versa.
Okay. The three I had,
You had different ones. Go.
they were more situational than sort of an event that
Okay,
you just sort of described. So there was uncertainty, escalation, and problem oriented. So if something felt like it was uncertain for somebody, there's going to be differences of opinion.
sure.
Escalation, if it's sort of run out of hand to a certain degree, this is my interpretation anyway, or problem oriented. We've got something that we need to solve,
Yeah.
and we're going to have probably different views as to what the solution might be. That was the ones I've just robbed that from your work.
Yes, and it is interesting because if you think about it, every performance environment has got all of these characteristics. The
Exactly.
exactly. There is uncertainty, there is complexity, there is ambiguousness, and so on and so forth. So,
I would say I would go even further than that. Is that if you haven't got those, you probably aren't creating an environment that is stretching people, that
sure.
is taking people to a higher level. If it's going to be challenging, it's going to be an ambitious goal. It's going to feel uncertain. It's going to create problems. It's going to make people feel a little bit like I'm not sure how this is going to go.
Correct. Yes, and then that brings me to this idea that conflict is not something that people need to be to be fearful of, to be afraid of, to be avoiding it. Every opportunity that you see that may be conflictual, you need to grasp it, and to start being curious and interrogate it alongside the people involved. So approach a conflictual situation every time, because that situation, once you approach it, you begin the journey to resolving it,
Mm.
and can bring people together and bring them a little bit closer as well.
I love that word curious because it's such a reframe, isn't it? In the sense of it taking people from let's butt heads, let's argue, and let's get into a combat situation, through to a state of wonder and what could be and diagnosing, as opposed to it's me versus you. Are there any other strategies that you support and promote in your work with coaches that help alleviate or potentially prevent conflict, or after it's happened, solving it again?
Well, I will just follow up what you just said, that in order to create a situation where you can have this type of conversation, particularly when there is conflict, or there is an element of failure, or a mistake, and you want to approach it, and you want to resolve it, and you want to get to the bottom of it. You need to create the conditions, and openness is one other communication strategy that we have within Compass, which is the second following conflict management. And openness is about being transparent, is about being honest, and allowing this flow of communication back and forth from the coach to the athlete to the coach, and other people that may be involved. But in addition to that, what I need to press is that is this notion of psychological safety that we have just started investigating, and we only have, as you know, 3 or 4 papers published at the moment around psychological safety, which I think is very pertinent notion, and perhaps a little bit misunderstood. However, it is used quite openly and freely within our circles. So psychological safety is that notion, this idea that we can speak up, we can share ideas, we can bring up problems without fear of intimidation, humiliation, embarrassment, or any other bad consequences that will follow by being open, being transparent, being ourselves. So psychological safety is very important, and we know from the research we have done that if psychological safety is something, it is created. And by the way, the coach, I believe, and this is what our research shows, the coach sets the tone. The coach needs to understand what psychological safety is and how it is developed, built, created, so that, you know, the athletes feel free to express themselves. So psychological safety also promotes good quality relationships. So it is another strategy. Openness and psychological safety together can promote and enhance good quality connections and bonds between coaches and athletes. And also, we didn't mention, and I know we are coming to an end, so I don't want to miss out
No,
from
let's keep going. No,
saying.
no, we can't.
Okay.
We can't cut it short. If you've got time, let's keep going.
I just wanted to say that, you know, research shows, and I want coaches and athletes to hear it, and whoever else listens to this, that there is evidence, very strong evidence, to indicate that the relationship that the coach and the athlete develop, that good quality relationship, promotes performance, not only subjective performance. You know, I perform well, you know, actual performance. We have found, we have recently evidence that leads to actual performance, actually performing better in competitions. And also well-being. And well-being, we know, Steve, is so important nowadays. So the relationship gives that good feel factor to both the coaches and the athletes. That, you know, it is worth doing what we are doing, despite the fact that it's so arduous and intense and challenging. So I just wanted to make that point, so that to highlight the significance and why we need to pay attention on developing better relationships.
So that's interesting. I saw some of the work that you've done with UK sport around belonging and how it's facilitative of qualities such as creativity, innovation, collaboration, progression, and retention. But you're all saying it's not just those good value habits and behaviors and in the job work, but actually it turns into results too: faster, higher, stronger.
That's right. Yes, and that is wonderful, isn't it? I mean, we can, you know, tick 2 boxes here with just one thing. And I think, you know, let's be honest. Developing good quality relationships is not an easy thing. It is complex, and it takes time. And it doesn't take just the coach to invest time, effort, and energy in developing those relationships. It takes the athlete, and the athletes also need to understand the value of that relationship, and the input and the contributions that they need to make in order to make that relationship work for themselves. But yes, you're absolutely right.
Well, I mean, that's so illuminating. It's also really affirming, because I think, and transformational to a certain degree, because I think for a long time we separate out behaviors and results, process and outcome, but yet sort of gets thrown in together or it's just accepted. Well, they're a toxic coach, but they get results. Um, or oh, it's a sympathetic kind of point of view. Well, they're a great coach, but they don't get results. And so, actually hearing that those coach-athlete relationship behaviors and nurturing that, probabilistically, at least, it starts to turn into results. I mean, that's amazing to hear.
I think it is important, and it is evidence, and there is more research we are doing, and other research teams are doing around the world around this particular area, which is relatively new. I will say, continues to be new. There is so much scope that we need to, that we need more research to do. But I wonder, Steve, whether these messages from academia for us actually penetrate practice and the process and the coaching. How much of what we say and what we have manifested through the research is being heard, listened, understood, and actually applied?
Mm.
That is the real question. And we're going back to those high profile coaches, and I can add Mel Marshall, Tracy Whittaker Smith from British swimming and British gymnastics, who have demonstrably shown how important is the relationship between themselves and their athletes. But in the grand scheme of things, how coaches and athletes do it? I want to know, do they do
Yeah.
it? Do they actually pay attention, or is it other things that take more time and interest? I'm not sure.
I was going to ask you, but I think there's such a short-termism in many sports, even even some of those longer burn sports like Olympic sports, where there is a requirement to get short-term results, not just talking about the sort of 5 game cycle at a Premier League manager, and if you don't get results, you're out, and they're willing to burn millions of pounds on somebody who then is going to probably in post for a short period of time potentially, and so will revert to behaviors that do not manifest long term. And so I do think this is probably more of an issue at a CEO chair position, that they have to transmit through an organization the importance of long-term coach behaviors, long-term coach development.
Yeah,
Because I
yeah,
don't really feel generally that the role of coaching, except for a few pivotal sports, big name sports, is not given the same regard as
yeah,
it should do. It's not giving the same support, development, and so this sort of still got this sort of volunteer aspect when actually that means perhaps less quality, less professional behaviors as a part of it. So
yeah,
yeah, I mean,
yeah.
an existential question, really.
It is, and I guess I will agree with what you said. Is about the support that coaches get, that in that particular area, to kind of raise their awareness, their understanding about the importance of good relationships, good leadership, good communication skills. These are key characteristics for better coaching, better performances, and I think there is this movement that we want to win well, as opposed we want to win at all costs. But it doesn't start at the performance level. Perhaps our conversation may sound as if we are focusing on performance, but I want, from the grassroots, from the early stages of sport participation, coaches to understand that the way they lead, the way that they relate and communicate is absolutely paramount for these young people to maintain their involvement in their sport and engagement in their sport for the long term.
And have a positive experience of that.
Positive
Um,
experience.
can I just go back a few steps, Sophia? I'd love to ask you just about, I think you turned up on complementarity on your model. Um, your advice for coaches to be able to support and challenge, because conflict management is one thing. There's probably a skill set and a communication method that you're going to have to be able to deal with when it arises. Um, but that's almost sort of the firefighting part. Support and challenge feels a bit more like creating the right positive environment to stretch people, to make people feel valued. Um, what's your top tips to be able to kind of get that those almost sometimes polar opposite qualities balanced and present in their coaching practice?
Yes, that is another great question, and a question that I have been thinking for a little while, because we know that in high performance, but not exclusively, we need, and the athletes know, need, and require is for them to be challenged, because how else will they improve? How else will they achieve their goals and aspirations and so on? So they need to be challenged, and of course they need to be supported. And those two things don't go actually. We have separated them, but I wonder whether they are more together than we make them. I think what is the key for me is that those coaches who really truly understand, know their athletes inside out, and athletes at the same time know that their coaches have nothing but their very interest at heart, and they have their back, and they're there to support them, are more likely to accept the challenge. And I have heard Bob Bowman, for example, speaking, the coach of Michael Phelps and many actually Olympic medalists, talking about that knowing and understanding the athlete and how far he can push them is important. So it goes hand in hand with having a connection with the athlete, which enables them to know and understand the athlete very well, and therefore helps them to know when, how, where, what to do to stretch them. Hopefully that
Yeah.
helps. But every time I speak to an athlete with regard to challenge and support, they will always say to me that they want their coaches to stretch them. I have not heard one that says that I don't want my coach to stretch, or or something else. The athletes want, expect, require their coaches to stretch them, but with sensitivity. And the sensitivity is, okay, they know me, they understand me,
Mm.
and they're able to pick up those vibes when the coaches push them. They know that they push them because it is now the time to be pushed, to be stretched, to be challenged.
Love that. That resonates. That resonates with me, and I think that it speaks also to environments, how we create environments, whether it's just comfortable or whether it's a bit relentless, and that sense of that pulse of it's not one or the other; it's doing both well. And I love that reframe of actually they're a bit closer than
Yeah,
they need to be done. If you're going to stretch somebody, to be able to do that in a way that makes people believe
yeah,
and feel as though you believe in them,
yeah, yeah. Because
that
at the
feels.
moment that you challenge, the athlete actually thinks this is because they are supporting me, because they want me
Yeah,
to be
okay.
the best that they can be. So maybe there is something there.
Wow, brilliant. Look, I mean, I could talk to you ever. It's such an interesting area, and I just to be back to your question, your point about why isn't this getting through? Well, I think it is starting to. I think it is a slower burn than it needs to be. But congratulations to you for pursuing this and the multitude of publications and presentations. I know you are a reference point globally around this work, and congratulations to you, because without you, we wouldn't be having these sorts of conversations or trying to make things better for athletes and coaches in the future. So, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Sophia. I really love the conversation.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Stephen, for your kind words. I really thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Wonderful.